The competition has been less than stiff for UCF for the first 2 weeks of the season here in 2019. We expect much more coming up this week at home against Stanford. We got Jeff Sharon on the line from Black and Gold Banneret. You can join him and the rest of the staff there at SB Nation covering UCF athletics. Jeff, how you doing today?
What's going on, Mark? Things are going well. It's another hot, sunny day, but we'll talk about how the weather might have an impact on the game in a little bit. But so far, it's been a bright start to the football season for UCF.
Yeah, blowout wins over Florida A&M and FAU with little resistance there. There has been a lot of adversity, though, at one particular positions that is mighty important. Mackenzie Milton, Brandon Wimbush, and on and on and on. And now we are in a situation where we don't necessarily know who's going to start on Saturday.
Yeah, that's and now another hat has been tossed into the ring. Of course, UCF started the season with Brandon Wimbush, the transfer from Notre Dame, the grad student, against FAMU. Played pretty well, very good but not great. Dylan Gabriel also came in for a few possessions and was fantastic in that ball game. Last week in the victory at FAU, 48-14. Wimbush did not play at all. Dylan Gabriel was cued in as the starter. We found out about that about an hour before kickoff. We were expecting Wimbush to play. And Dylan Gabriel played the whole game, was kind of up and down. He finished at 7 of 19 for 245 yards and 2 touchdowns. But there's an interesting stat that popped up on the CBS Sports Network telecast was that Gabriel's 7 completions for 245 yards was the most yards on the fewest completions by one quarterback in a game since 2003. So he made the most of his opportunities, a true freshman out of Hawaii who really can rip the ball. But now, as we head into Stanford in this important 2-week stretch for UCF as they play Stanford at home and then Pitt on the road, Darryl Mack has now re-entered the fray. You remember him as the backup to Mackenzie Milton from last year, who led UCF to the victory over Memphis in the conference championship game, played admirably in the Fiesta Bowl against LSU. Mack has been cleared to play after he broke his ankle just prior to camp in a non-football injury. And Josh Heupel, actually, we found out just a few moments ago at his press conference, said we were expecting him possibly to name a starter, and they asked him, okay, so who's your starter? And he said, I don't know. So we do not know who's going to be taking the snaps, at least yet, for UCF when they take on the Stanford Cardinal on Saturday at 3:30 p.m. on ESPN.
So many quarterbacks in play. It's almost like an offensive line rotation, what it's been the past year and specifically the last few weeks at UCF. But the winning continues. That would be 1 loss in 2+ seasons. And we got Jeff Sharon on the line from SB Nation's Black and Gold Banneret to talk up the big matchup against Stanford. Before we move on to any kind of matchup challenges against the Cardinal, the evaluation is sometimes difficult when one team is far superior to the other. But I'm going to ask you to give us what your take is on how the teams performed the first 2 weeks and what stood out to you.
Well, in the first 2 weeks, when you play an FCS opponent like Florida A&M, who really struggled, and then FAU, who is having a rough season of their own, it looks like, it's easy to nitpick, I think, if you're a UCF fan, especially after you've won all these regular season games in a row, and you have and you scored 30+ points in 27 games in a row as well, the longest streak in the AP poll era. But I think one of the surprising things that's happened is the defense has played extraordinarily well. I think even better than expected, even given the competition. UCF right now is top 10 in the country in both total offense and total defense. Obviously, they probably should be given the competition at this point, but there have been some bright spots out there for UCF, particularly on defense. Nate Evans has been really good at the middle linebacker spot. He's the team's leading tackler so far. even despite the injury to Brandon Moore that was suffered late in the FAMU game, Brandon Moore, a key corner for UCF on the outside. UCF has gotten a couple guys to pick him up on the outside, especially Aaron Robinson, who was a highly touted transfer who missed most of last season after he suffered an injury on the opening kickoff of the first game. But UCF has done a very good job. They're averaging 55 points a game, more than double the first downs. They're averaging over 600 yards of offense, and they're giving up just barely over 200. So it's kind of hard to say, like, is UCF doing what they should be doing? Well, yeah, exactly. Just a little bit better than maybe I think some of us thought. There were some concerns about the defense last year under Randy Shannon. They seemed to be giving up a hefty amount of yards and a lot of points. It's just that the offense would outscore whoever it was that they were up against. This past offseason, I think, has shown that the defense has really stepped up their game. And it should be, and they will have a challenge for them going up against a quarterback like KJ Costello in Stanford.
Yes, so it has been announced by David Shaw, KJ Costello leaving the field in week 1 near the end of the Northwestern win, that he's ready to go for the trip to UCF. I don't know if UCF fans were noticing. Of course, Stanford is a solid top 15 to 25 program in the nation and has been for about a decade, but it's not necessarily had the success of the 2010 or 11 to 15 run when they were battling for Rose Bowl championships and competing near the top 5 in the nation. They've been very good, 8 or 9 wins since then, but paying attention to last week's game in particular, because USC has moved to an air raid offense. I'm sure there's various concepts that are very similar to what UCF does. And although Stanford has never hit any of us as being the first program or team that comes to mind in regards to speed and athleticism, they were really run off the field in the second half by USC after going up 17-3, being outscored 42-3. And with similar style and athleticism, it's got to be a thought that UCF could do similar work against the Cardinal this week.
Yeah, Mark, I think you hit the nail right on the head with that when we were breaking down the matchup, because I watched that game too, the Stanford USC game. I dared to stay up for it. But you're absolutely right that Stanford in that game really struggled with USC's team speed. Stanford, we know, they're about as pro-style a college team as you'll usually find, particularly on offense. They tend to try and beat you physically up front. They're big, they're strong, but they're not necessarily fast or athletic. And in UCF's case, UCF is fast and athletic. Somewhere in that neighborhood of where Southern Cal is, because they're, like you said, making that transition, that kind of offense. UCF has been running that offense for now a 4th season. So. Or at least that kind of an offense. And when you look on the other side, on Stanford's offense, when Stanford has the football, even though Costello is back, Stanford lost Walker Little, their left tackle, who protects Costello's blind side. He was a first-round NFL draft grade. He's out for the season. So Stanford's going to have a backup left tackle out there facing UCF's pass rush, which has been very good to this point this season, not just in terms of rushing the passer, but getting into the backfield on running plays as well. Last week against FAU, UCF defenders recorded 16 tackles for loss combined and 5 sacks against Chris Robinson and FAU. So that tells you the kind of defense that Stanford is going to be facing. That they're going to want that UCF and Randy Shannon, they're going to want to get KJ Costello off of his spot. Don't give him a lot of time to throw, because we know how good he is. He's a very good quarterback. We'll probably be seeing him on Sundays too. And then on offenses, just keep doing what you're doing. And UCF has been dominating the line of scrimmage against teams so far. A lot of people think of UCF as a spread it out, throw it all over the yard kind of offense. It's actually what Josh Heupel likes to run is a power running game out of spread formation with a little bit of misdirection and then opening up the passing game for play action down the field, that vertical passing game. So far, it's worked for UCF. We'll see if it works against Stanford.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. This is what we do each and every day is break down the game we love with bloggers, broadcasters, and writers across the nation. We welcome in Jeff Sharon on a regular basis. He provides amazing insight into the UCF program historically, and here the 2019 version is 2-0. That last figure in the loss column has become familiar now for the last two seasons for UCF fans. 2-0 on the season, facing their first challenge, we assume, against Stanford. Jeff, would love to know your perspective on the scheduling of the game in regards to the respect factor that we've discussed several times in regards to playing these types of games, and this being a bit of a different type of opponent. It's been Pitt in recent years, and obviously the bowl games against LSU and Auburn, and a few other programs, North Carolina being down at the time. But this being a program, despite the result against USC last week, that seems to be near the top of its game and a well-respected program for its football on the field right now.
Yeah, and it's obviously big for UCF to get an opponent like this. This is actually the first time that Stanford has played a regular season game in the state of Florida in that program's history. One of the oldest football programs in college football. So, and who are they doing it against? UCF, not Miami, not Florida State, not Florida. So there's some prestige associated with that. I think if you're UCF, you kind of look around and like the narrative is starting to solidify about their non-conference schedule. And it's really unfortunate because right now it's looking like Stanford is going to have a rough year. And I think ESPN's FPI had them projected for about 5 to 6 wins this year. And that's too bad because back in 2014, September 2014, when UCF and Stanford signed this home and home deal, which, by the way, is what UCF wants to do with power conference opponents, is that at that moment in time when they put ink to paper, UCF was coming off a 12-1 season where they won the Fiesta Bowl over Baylor, and they were in the midst of a season where they were about to win their second consecutive, at least a share of the conference championship. Stanford was coming off back-to-back BCS Bowls, and thanks to my buddy Matt Brodsky over at CBS for actually getting that number to me. And now, start of the season, this was looking like a top 25 matchup. Stanford scores only 17 points against Northwestern, gets a win, but then gets boat raced by USC, and now they're out of the top 25. And UCF fans are kind of like, oh boy, here we go again. You know, as soon as we get a good team in here, a team that kind of has a little national cachet, it's going to get poo-pooed by the media because, well, Stanford's having a bad year. And Pitt's struggling a little bit. They struggled last week against Ohio. So it's like you can't win for losing if you're UCF sometimes. But I'm still holding out hope. I think that if UCF performs in a way that really – if they go out and they really take it to Stanford, and I think there's a possibility if that offense gets going and in the Florida heat, that might happen. Then I think voters might take, some of the poll voters and maybe the CFP committee down the line might take some notice of that and be like, wow, okay, UCF is doing this to teams that maybe their own conference opponents might do to them, or maybe doing it even worse. So I don't know. We're just gonna have to wait and see. This next 2 weeks, Stanford at home, and then at Pitt next week is going to be an acid test for UCF. And keep an eye on what happens with Pitt as well, because they're playing Penn State this week. I know UCF fans will be keeping half of an eye on that, and 1.5 eyes on the football field at Spectrum Stadium to see what happens with that. So, such is the nature of scheduling in 2019.
Vegas has obviously taken note of Stanford's struggles against USC. The line opened at 7.5, has now moved with the betting public liking UCF at home, considering what appears to be an athletic advantage. 8.5 points is what the line is currently. Would not have expected that preseason. Stanford UCF was very high on my list of non-conference matchups coming up this season. Want to remind everyone that they can go to my Voice of College Football community, get my weekly predictions, including this one 31-20 against the spread the first 2 weeks of the season. We also have a deal with BetNow.eu, in which a number of us YouTubers teaming up with Volunteer Roadshow, St. Jude's Hospital, and BetNow.eu. What you do is you go there. If I can find the banner, you go there and you get 100% bonus on your account money. So if you put in $100, they give you 100. So you're playing in front of the sticks right out of the gate, right there at BetNow.eu. But you got to use the promo code MRTVCFB. So the formula, Jeff, seems to be pretty cut and dry, that if UCF can take advantage of spacing and getting athletes out in that space, getting them the ball, which with Gabriel might be a bit of an issue considering just what I'm seeing based on that number of 7 of 19 last week when you said maybe a bit inconsistent, that would speak to that number. It certainly has the arm strength, but may not harness it each and every play. But at the same time, if Stanford can run the clock, and the issue that Stanford has is big mauling, pro style, all those stereotypes that come into play when we think Stanford, I think are being peeled away. I think some of it still applies to a certain extent. But you mentioned their 5-star left tackle is gone for the season. They have tried to kind of morph that offense into something a little bit more 21st century, and it doesn't maybe work well for them, but they do have one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and obviously there's talent on the team, so it could be interesting. But UCF's mission seems to be pretty clear-cut in regards to making sure that they're the winner.
Yeah, it's the same formula that I think we've become used to the last few years is release the Kraken, right? Get up on them early, score on that first drive, get a stop, and then do it again and put them down 14-0 early. That's what UCF has tried to do to all of their opponents, and it's worked to good effect. We even saw last week, even though you mentioned that Dillon Gabriel kind of struggled a little bit in the overall scheme of things, he was 3 of 5 for over 100 yards in his first 2 drives, and UCF was up 14-0 in the blink of an eye. And the game was pretty much over by that point because once the defense has that lead, then they're able to tee off on your quarterback. And the one thing that UCF always has in their back pocket, at least right now, is Randy Shannon, who's the king of the adjustment. He knows how to attack a pro-style offense. He also knows how to make those adjustments if things get a little bit tight. So I think the question is, and what we're really intrigued by is each of the 3 quarterbacks who could get the start on Saturday brings their own brings their own style to the table that has some advantages and some disadvantages. For example, Brandon Wimbush, very strong runner, not the most accurate passer in the world, but highly experienced, highly mature, well respected within the huddle, and has played Stanford before. When you got Dillon Gabriel, it's okay. Are we going to throw the ball around the yard? Are we, because he's by far the best passer, I think overall between those 3 guys. And then Darryl Mack is kind of a fusion of the 2 of them, but DJ also has more experience in the offense than those other 2 guys because he was here last year. But do you want to throw him out there against Stanford in his very first action, having missed all of camp? I don't know. That would be a pretty big risk. But if there's one thing we know about Josh Heupel, he's not afraid of taking risks. Go ask Memphis about that last year. So it's a really intriguing situation that will play itself out on national television.
I'll pass along 2 notes on Stanford, kind of my thoughts. Number 1, I will continue to applaud them as I did the entire offseason for scheduling non-conference Northwestern, UCF, and Notre Dame. No cupcakes at all. No FCS. Yeah. No lower group of 5. Nothing like that. And when you play in the Pac-12, which I understand is not the best conference right now, but it's still deep. It's still talented. They still have to deal with Washington, Oregon, Washington State, USC, etc. They go out there and they schedule games, and they do it each and every year. I would love for other Power 5 teams to take that type of approach. Again, UCF.
So would we.
Yes, you would. Yes, you would. You would have more games to play. But UCF, Northwestern, and Notre Dame is pretty rugged for the Stanford Cardinal. Point number 2 would be, despite what we saw last week, I'm not saying that Stanford doesn't have real problems specifically in this matchup and in areas that will continue to be exposed most likely, regardless of the scheme and what they attempt to do on film and relate that and translate that to the field. But I think we can't overreact to one team's struggles 1 week, as we see many times. If take away the very elite of college football and take away the bottom dwellers, and a lot of different teams show up from week to week. So I would expect Stanford to show up with some pride and some fight, and it to be a pretty good matchup with UCF.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. There's one thing I think that bodes in Stanford's favor, and that could be the weather. All right. We're expecting it obviously to be hot, but off the Bahamas, and God bless those poor people because they have enough to deal with at this point. But there's another tropical wave that's kind of forming and getting a little bit more organized. It might get here to Central Florida in time for Saturday's game. If it does, preliminary forecasts are showing 80% chance of showers, wind between 16 and 20 miles an hour. It might be miserable. And if that's the case, that could slow UCF down, and that's what Stanford wants, because it would slow down UCF's footing. UCF plays on a grass field, but also it would cool down the stadium, and that takes away one of your potential advantages. In that, like we saw that last year in the Pitt game, where some guys for Pitt, were kind of falling all over the place, and all you need to do is just search on Twitter for Pitt versus UCF, and you'll see some pretty funny antics that were taking place on the Pitt around the Pitt huddle when UCF's offense was moving down the field. So, not that I'm accusing anyone of anything nefarious or any of that, but if the weather is bad, that could help Stanford. Does that mean that it could tip the game in their favor? I don't know, because UCF has shown this year that they are willing to run the football and run it well. And this offensive line, I think that's another part of UCF that has not gotten enough credit, is this offensive line led by the center Jordan Johnson, who's going to be playing in the pros. He's a vegan, by the way, over 300 pounds, probably the best center in college football for my money. Has been sublime the last three seasons, and this will be a big test for them against a major level defensive front seven like Stanford. So this should be interesting.
UCF Stanford Saturday night should be an interesting one, regardless of the weather. Jeff Sharon helping us break it down. Join him and the rest of the staff there at Black and Gold Banneret. Jeff, we appreciate the time.
Mark, always good to talk to you. Enjoy the first hints of fall up there